The first thing he heard was the singing. It drifted through the cold like a ghost that had lost its way, soft, trembling, barely strong enough to fight the wind. A lullaby, old, broken in places, as if the singer was afraid the song itself might shatter if held too tightly. The outlaw stopped his horse. Snow lay thin across the prairie, pale as ash, and the moon hung low, turning the world silver and cruel. He had been riding hard since sundown, pushing both himself and the animal beneath him, running not from the law but from memory. And yet that song wrapped around his chest and squeezed. Because he knew it. He knew every rise and fall of that melody, every pause where a breath was taken too late. It was the lullaby his wife had sung on nights when the wind howled and the fire burned low. The song she had hummed when she believed no one was listening. The song she sang the night she died. The outlaw's hand trembled as he pulled the reins. "No," he whispered into the cold. "You're dead." The singing faltered. Then came a small voice thin as a matchstick. "Please, sir?" "Don't leave." He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against frost-hardened earth. Near the edge of a dried creek bed, he saw the child, a boy no older than 8, wrapped in a threadbare coat far too large for him. His face was red with cold, his eyes too old for his years, and clutched in his arms was a bundle of rags that might once have been a blanket. The boy swallowed hard. "I wasn't singing for you. I was singing so I wouldn't be scared." The outlaw crouched, studying him as if he might vanish at any second. "Where'd you learn that song?" The boy hesitated, his fingers tightening. "My mama sang it, before she didn't know more." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind and the outlaw's uneven breathing. "What's your name, son?" he asked. "Eli," the boy said. "Eli Carter." The outlaw felt the ground tilt beneath him. Carter. He rose abruptly, turning away as if the child had struck him. He had sworn never to hear that name again. Sworn never to step foot near the town tied to it. And yet here it was, standing barefoot in the snow, singing his wife's lullaby. "Where's your father?" the outlaw asked, his voice rough. Eli shook his head. "Died 2 winters back. Fever took him." "And your mother?" The boy looked down. "They buried her last week. Pastor said God needed her more than I did." The outlaw clenched his jaw. He knew that pastor, knew the town, knew the graves that filled its crooked hill like rotting teeth. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked. "They took the house," Eli said simply. "Sheriff said Mama owed money. Said I'd be sent east. To a place with other boys." The word sent hung heavy in the air. "So you ran?" "Yes, sir." The outlaw studied the boy again, seeing not just hunger and fear, but something familiar, stubbornness edged with quiet hope. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a strip of dried meat, holding it out. Eli hesitated. "You gonna make me pay for it?" The outlaw almost laughed. "Almost. No," he said. "Just eat." The boy devoured it like a starving wolf, tears freezing on his lashes. The outlaw watched, his heart aching in a way he thought had long since burned itself out. "What were you a skin help for?" he said. Eli wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "I heard you were comin'." The outlaw stiffened. "You heard wrong, no sir. Folks been whispering. Say there is a man ridden these lands who ain't too afraid of sheriffs or judges. A bad man, but a fair one." The outlaw let out a bitter breath. "They're wrong about the fair part." Eli looked up at him, his eyes steady. "I just need to get to Red Hollow." The name struck like a gunshot. "That's 2 days' ride," the outlaw said. "And it's no place for a child. My aunt's there," Eli said. "Mama said if anything happened, she said to find her. I don't know how else to get there." The outlaw turned away again, staring at the horizon where the darkness swallowed the land whole. Red Hollow was where it had all ended, where blood had soaked into the dirt and lawmen had sworn his name would hang from the gallows. "Find someone else," he said quietly. "I ain't your answer." Eli's voice trembled. "Sir, please." The outlaw closed his eyes. He saw his wife's face, pale and still. Heard the lullaby drifting through a room that smelled of sickness and candle smoke. Felt the weight of a promise he had broken. "Sing it again," he said suddenly. Eli blinked. "Sing what?" "The song." The boy swallowed, then began. His voice wavered, but the melody was true. Every note cut deeper than the last. The outlaw dropped to one knee. Tears burned down his weathered face, carving paths through years of dust and regret. He pressed his fist into the frozen ground, breathing through the pain. "That was my wife's song," he said hoarsely. Eli stopped singing. "Your wife?" She died a long time ago. Before you were born. He looked at the boy, his eyes red. Your mama... What was her name? Mary, Eli said. Mary Carter. The outlaw's heart slammed. Mary Carter had been there. In the room, the night his wife passed. She had held the candle. She had wept quietly in the corner. How did she know the song? He whispered. She said it was a gift, Eli replied. Said someone gave it to her when she needed it most. The outlaw laughed softly, brokenly. She did. The wind howled harder, as if the world itself were listening. I can't take you to Red Hollow, the outlaw said after a long moment. Men there want me dead. Eli's shoulders sagged. Then, I reckon this is where I stop. The words were too final for a child. The outlaw stood, staring down at him. He saw his past and his sins reflected in those eyes. Saw the chance maybe the last he'd ever get to set something right. Get on the horse, he said. Eli's head snapped up. You mean it? For now, the outlaw replied. We'll ride till dawn, after that. We'll see. As he lifted the boy into the saddle, distant hoofbeats echoed across the plain. The outlaw froze. Lantern light flickered on the horizon. The law was closer than it had ever been. And this time he wasn't alone. The lantern light grew brighter with every single heartbeat. The outlaw swung into the saddle right behind Eli, his hands firm but gentle as he turned the horse away from the approaching riders. He didn't spur it into a run. Running just makes noise. Panic makes mistakes. Instead, he guided the animal down into the shallow creek bed, where frozen mud swallowed the sound and the land dipped just enough to hide them from view. Eli leaned back against him, small and shaking. Are they looking for me? The boy whispered. No, the outlaw said quietly. They're looking for me. The child went completely still. They rode crouched low, breath held, until the hoofbeats faded away into the wind. Only then did the outlaw guide the horse back onto the open plain, angling north where the hills rose jagged and dark. Minutes passed. Then more. Eli finally spoke. Are you going to leave me when the sun comes up? The question wasn't accusing. It was worse than that. It was prepared for disappointment. The outlaw swallowed hard. I don't rightly know yet. That answer seemed honest enough to satisfy the boy. He just nodded, resting his head against the outlaw's chest. Exhaustion claimed him quickly, the way it always does when fear finally loosens its grip. As Eli slept, the outlaw rode on, his eyes fixed on the stars, memories dragging behind him like a heavy chain. He had not meant to become what the world called him. Once, he had been a simple ranch hand with calloused palms and simple hopes. He had loved a woman who sang to the night as if it were listening. He had believed a man could work hard, keep his word, and die peacefully in his own bed. That belief had died the very night the banker came to collect. They had wanted the land. They always did. When the outlaw's wife fell ill, when the cattle thinned, and the crops failed, the debt just grew like a living thing. He had begged, promised. He signed papers he did not understand. Then came the men with guns. One shot fired too soon. One scream. One mistake that could never, ever be taken back. By dawn, his wife lay dead, and the world had given him a brand new name, Outlaw. The sun rose pale and weak, spilling light across the plains. Frost clung to the grass like silver dust. The outlaw guided the horse toward a stand of cottonwoods near a half-frozen stream, dismounting quietly. Eli stirred as he was lifted down. Is it morning? Yes, the outlaw said. And we need rest. They made a small fire, hidden low between rocks. The outlaw gave the boy water and the last of the dried meat. Eli ate slowly now, saving half without even being told. You always do that? The outlaw asked. Eli just shrugged. Mama said hunger comes back quicker than kindness. The words hit deeper than any blade could. While the boy slept again, curled near the fire, the outlaw stood watch. He cleaned his revolver, more out of habit than need, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew the sheriff who hunted him now. Sheriff Caleb Moore. Once, Moore had been a deputy who shared coffee with him on cold mornings. A man who believed the law could be fair. That belief had not survived the years either. By midday, the sound of riders carried on the wind again closer this time. Voices drifted. The outlaw cursed softly under his breath. He shook Eli awake. We've got company. Eli's eyes widened. What do? We don't run, the outlaw said. Not yet. He led the horse into the trees, tied it securely, and guided Eli deeper into the brush. No matter what you hear, you stay quiet. You don't come out unless I say so. What if they hurt you? The outlaw knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. Then you remember this, whatever happens. You keep going to Red Hollow. Don't look back. Eli's lip trembled. You're coming back, ain't you? The outlaw did not answer. The riders broke into the clearing moments later. 3 men, dust-stained and hard-eyed. Sheriff Moore rode at their center. Well, I'll be damned, Moore said, spotting the dying fire. He's close. The outlaw stepped out from the trees, hands raised high. Afternoon, Caleb. The sheriff's jaw tightened. You always did have a talent for disappearing. Drop the gun. The outlaw did. The deputies moved fast, rough hands grabbing him, forcing him down to his knees. Moore studied him for a long moment. You could have kept running? Still can, the outlaw replied. Not today. Moore glanced at the trees. You alone? Yes. The lie tasted bitter. Moore hesitated. Something flickered in his eyes, doubt, maybe. Then it hardened. You're wanted for murder, he said. And for the robbery in Pine Creek. I didn't rob Pine Creek. Doesn't matter, Moore replied coldly. They need a hanging, and you fit. They hauled the outlaw to his feet. As they turned him toward the horses, a branch snapped behind them. Eli stepped into the clearing. Let him go, the boy said, his voice shaking but loud. Every gun swung toward him. The outlaw's heart stopped. Eli, no. Moore froze. What's this? The boy moved closer, his small hands clenched into fists. He saved me. I was gonna freeze. Moore's eyes narrowed. Where'd you come from, son? From nothin', Eli said. Just like him. The sheriff looked between them, suspicion growing. You related? No, the outlaw said quickly. But Eli spoke at the same exact time. He knew my mama. Silence fell heavy in the clearing. What was her name? Moore asked, his voice low. Mary Carter. Eli replied. Moore sucked in a sharp breath. That can't be, he muttered. Mary died last week. Yes, sir, Eli said. That's why I'm alone. The sheriff dismounted slowly, crouching before the boy. Mary Carter was a good woman. She was, Eli whispered. Moore stood, turning back to the outlaw. You knew her? I did, the outlaw said. Long ago, the sheriff's gaze sharpened, like he was putting pieces together. You were there the night your wife died. The outlaw said nothing. And Mary was there too, Moore continued. She told me once. Said she never forgave the men who came for your land. A long moment passed, stretched thin by the wind. Moore exhaled. You should have been dead years ago. Maybe, the outlaw replied. But I ain't yet. Moore looked at Eli again, at the thin coat, the bruised hands, the eyes far too old for a child. Finally, he made a decision. Take the deputies back to town, he said to one of his men. The man protested. Sheriff, that's an order. When they were gone, Moore faced the outlaw alone. You've got one night, he said quietly. Get the boy to Red Hollow. After that, if I see you again, I won't hesitate. The outlaw nodded. That's more than I deserve. Moore mounted his horse, pausing one last time. Mary said you weren't evil. Just lost. Then he rode away, leaving them in the silence. The outlaw sank to the ground, his breath shaking. Eli ran to him, throwing his small arms around his neck. You're safe. For now, the outlaw said. They rode again as dusk fell, the sky bleeding red behind them. Red Hollow loomed ahead, a dark line against the horizon. The outlaw felt it in his bones. Whatever waited there would decide everything. And fate, he knew, was not finished with either of them yet. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Red Hollow appeared at dawn like an old scar reopened by light. The town lay quiet beneath a pale sky, its wooden buildings leaning as if they were tired of standing. Smoke drifted from a few chimneys, and the streets held the silence of a place that remembered far too much. The outlaw slowed his horse at the ridge, overlooking the town, his chest tightening as memories stirred deep within him. This was where his life had broken, where blood had soaked into dust, where his name had become something whispered with fear. Beside him, Eli clutched the reins, his small hands trembling. This is it, isn't it? The boy asked, his voice barely a whisper. The outlaw nodded slowly. There was no turning back now. They rode into town at a steady pace. The sound of hooves echoed against the hard-packed earth, drawing eyes from doorways and windows. Some townsfolk recognized the man beneath the low-pulled hat, their faces hardening with old grudges. Others only felt the weight of history passing through their streets, a cold shadow in the morning light. The outlaw kept his gaze forward, his posture calm but guarded. Eli stayed close, his trust in the man beside him absolute. For the first time in days, the boy felt the nearness of safety, a fragile hope taking root in his young heart. At the edge of town stood a modest house, worn by years but alive with a quiet warmth. Smoke curled gently from its chimney, a welcoming plume against the gray sky. Eli's face brightened, a genuine smile breaking through the weariness. "That's my aunt's house," he said, hope finally breaking through his voice like the sun through clouds. They dismounted, and Eli, without a moment's hesitation, ran to the door, knocking hard. When it opened, a woman froze in place, disbelief filling her eyes. Then she dropped to her knees and pulled the boy into her arms, a choked sob escaping her lips. "Eli, my boy," she whispered through tears, holding him as if she might never let him go. The outlaw stepped back, feeling like a ghost at a family reunion, unsure of his place in this tender scene. He watched them in silence, the ache in his chest, a familiar companion. The woman's eyes finally lifted to him, searching his face. Recognition flickered, slow and heavy, like a dawning she'd long dreaded. "You're the man Mary spoke about," she said quietly, her voice full of unspoken questions. The outlaw could only nod. "I didn't want to come," he replied, his own voice rough with disuse. "But I couldn't leave him alone." She studied him for a long, heavy moment, seeing not just the fearsome outlaw, but something else, something deeper. Then she stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. Inside, the house was warm, smelling of fresh coffee and clean wood. Eli sat at the table, his small hands wrapped around a warm mug, the exhaustion of his journey finally giving way to a profound sense of peace. But that calm shattered with a sharp, authoritative knock at the door. The outlaw's body tensed instantly, his hand instinctively moving toward his side. "Who is it?" the woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Sheriff Moore," came the answer from outside. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. The sheriff entered, his hat respectfully in his hands. His eyes moved first to the boy, a flicker of relief crossing his features, then they settled on the outlaw. There was no anger in his face, only a quiet resolve. "The truth has come out," he said, his voice steady and clear. "And it changes things." The outlaw said nothing, his stony expression a mask for the storm brewing inside. Sheriff Moore continued, letting his words hang in the air. "The banker lied. The debt was false, the land, it was never stolen." He paused, letting the weight of that revelation sink in before delivering the final blow. "And your wife's death? It wasn't your fault." The words struck the outlaw like a physical force, a storm breaking after years of drought. He closed his eyes as decades of guilt and self-loathing collapsed inside him. His knees weakened, and he sat down heavily at the table, his breath coming in ragged, shaking gasps. The sheriff placed a folded yellowed letter on the table. "Mary Carter left this for you." With trembling hands, the outlaw opened it. The handwriting was gentle, achingly familiar. His eyes scanned the words. "If you ever hear the song again," it read, "know that forgiveness still lives. Take care of the boy if you can. And if you can't, forgive yourself anyway." He broke then. Decades of pain, of running, of a sorrow so deep he thought it was part of his own soul, finally burst free. Tears fell, silent and hot, a dam of grief finally giving way. Eli, watching him, stepped closer and placed a small, steady hand on his arm. "You're not lost," the boy said softly, his voice wise beyond his years. "Mama said lost people just need something to love." Sheriff Moore cleared his throat, breaking the sacred silence. "You can leave if you want," he said, his tone unexpectedly gentle. "Go somewhere else. Start over." The outlaw looked up, his eyes red but clear for the first time in a lifetime. He shook his head slowly. "No more running." The woman, Eli's aunt, nodded, a look of understanding on her face. "Eli needs someone who understands the dark without letting it win." The sheriff accepted the choice with a simple nod and quietly took his leave, closing the door on a world that was finally beginning to mend. Months passed. Spring returned color to the plains, painting the hills in green and gold. The outlaw, no longer defined by that name, took honest work on a ranch north of town. He rose before dawn, the clean ache of hard labor a welcome penance, and slept with a clean exhaustion he hadn't known in years. He taught Eli how to ride, not just a horse, but the currents of the world. He taught him how to care for the land, to face life with courage instead of anger. Laughter, bright and clear, slowly returned to the boy's life, echoing across the open fields. And in the quiet evenings, when the fire burned low and the stars listened from their infinite distance, Eli would sometimes hum a familiar gentle lullaby. The outlaw would stand in the doorway of the small cabin, his hat in his hand, watching the boy. And in the flickering firelight, tears would glisten in his eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. The song no longer carried the sound of loss, it carried the sound of home. And for the first time in his life, the outlaw, the man who had been lost for so long, felt truly free. The song had finally found its rest, and so had he.